We believe that some stories must be challenged, not because they're wrong, but because they're so profoundly right about, well, about human vulnerability, that they deserve a really rational, structured inquiry.
I agree.
Today, we're looking at a classic that feels less like a novel and more like a detailed philosophical argument.
Yeah.
George Orwell's 1984.
Exactly. We're treating this fiction not just as entertainment, but as an intense, critical study. A study of human reasoning and really intellectual ethics.
Right.
The book presents this political system that's designed to destroy the moral architecture of reality itself. So by looking at it through a consistent critical lens, we can pull out its most crucial lessons.
And you are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book summaries. Our mission today is simple, but it's also deeply provocative. What remains of personhood? What remains of you when a state claims the absolute right to define reality itself?
Not just law or policy.
No, reality.
And that's how we're framing this whole discussion. We're focused on the book's central argument. What do human beings become when their fundamental tools for an independent life? Their language, their memory, their ability to love.
All of it.
All of it is brought under total political control.
Okay, let's unpack that.
Yeah.
The core question in 1984 is really about totalitarianism taken to its devastating logical extreme.
Yes.
This isn't just about harsh rules. It's about a regime that is dedicated to occupying the mind.
Right. Through constant surveillance, a tightly controlled language, and the systematic falsification of history, the goal is to make dissent literally unthinkable.
So if we look at that critically, the book's primary point of contention, it's about truth.
It's all about truth. Can a society possibly preserve any basic justice, any freedom, once it decides to treat truth as just an instrument of power?
Instead of a shared standard that everyone, even the government, has to follow.
Exactly. A shared objective standard.
And the genius of it is how Orwell takes that very abstract question and makes it visceral, emotional. The battle isn't fought in the streets. It's that internal tension between an individual's conscience and a collective that demands just absolute conformity.
And think about the world architecture he builds. These three superstates, Oceania, Eurasia, and Eastasia, and they're locked in perpetual war.
But the war isn't meant to be won.
Not at all. The war isn't a means to an end. It is the end. It's a structural decision.
Right. It's a mechanism. It's designed to keep the population constantly exhausted, terrified.
And dependent. It ensures that all this massive production capability is just funneled into useless destruction.
Which keeps resources scarce.
And that justifies the regime's brutal control and managed scarcity. Its policy as a form of psychological warfare.
So the party is basically turning politics into a machine to prevent progress. Because if people were too comfortable, they might demand real freedom.
Precisely. And the language they use for this is chilling.
The slogans, the ministries. The Ministry of Peace wages war, the Ministry of Love tortures.
And the public rituals. It all shows what happens when political speech is engineered specifically to disguise cruelty and erase accountability.
It just muddies reality instead of clarifying it.
It's propaganda wallpaper. And this is where the symbolism starts to carry this incredible ethical weight. You think about the key images.
Your Big Brother's face everywhere.
The telescreens, the thought police, the entire Newspeak project. These aren't just plot devices. They compress really complex ethical claims about a surveillance state.
So these devices, they dramatize how this obsession with control leads to the misuse of reason, of freedom, of truth. I mean, when every single space is being watched, what happens to your conscience?
Conscience becomes a crime. Memory, even affection becomes a crime. When you realize you might be overheard at any moment, you stop thinking critically.
You police your own thought.
Exactly. The state doesn't have to do the heavy lifting anymore. Your own conscience is under occupation.
And this is where it gets really interesting with language. Newspeak. It's a technology of control that aims to do one thing. Shrink the vocabulary for dissent?
Yes. It's designed so that certain concepts like freedom or honor, in the old sense, they literally can't be formulated.
Because the words are gone.
The words are just gone. Take the example of replacing bad with ungood. It seems harmless, right?
On the surface, yeah.
But it removes the entire spectrum of negativity, all the nuance, all the philosophical depth that comes with a concept like wickedness or evil. It is a direct attack on intellectual standards.
On clarity, on precision.
On depth. Impoverished language undercuts rigorous thinking. If you don't have the words for tyranny or justice, you can't analyze it. You can't even think about alternatives.
And that leads right to the core mental trick the party demands.
Doublethink.
Doublethink. The trained ability to hold two just flatly contradictory beliefs at the same time and accept both. It's the story's central piece of twisted logic.
It is. It's anti-logic.
But how does that work? I mean, in practice, how can you be forced to believe the party has always been at war with East Asia when yesterday they were your ally?
Well, the slogans tell you how. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength.
It's a complete inversion of critical reasoning.
It is. Instead of basing your conclusion on evidence, you reason from authority backward. You just adjust reality to match whatever the party declares in that moment. Yesterday's facts don't matter.
So the protagonist, Winston, he's this clerk whose job is literally to falsify records. He manufactures the truth every day.
But he holds on. He has this stubborn, deeply dangerous attachment to private memory, to old language, and to private affection.
And his inner conflict is the central ethical tension of the whole book.
Absolutely. It's that agonizing battle between the safety of conformity, which is survival,
and the massive risk of thinking and feeling honestly. Integrity.
And his whole moral evolution is about whether he chooses to preserve that inner self, even if it leads to, well, to inevitable defeat.
We see that conflict in how the characters embody different traits. Some have this hunger for a better past, others have this fanatical loyalty.
And many just have this self-protective cynicism, just trying to survive.
Even the central relationship in the book, it functions less like a romance.
Oh, much less. It's more of an ethical experiment. A fragile quest for mutual, honest recognition inside a system designed to sever all loyalty.
To anyone but the state.
Anyone. Parent, child, lover. It doesn't matter. Love becomes the final frontier of private thought.
Which really forces you to pause for a mindful moment here.
Mm-hmm.
When the book shows ordinary citizens repeating slogans, cheering for destruction, is Orwell just condemning them? Or is he inviting us, the readers, to notice how our own convenience, our own fear,
and social pressure,
how all of that can slowly distort anyone's moral vision?
And our channel, Mindful Moments, builds on questions exactly like these. We offer AI-supported analyses, summaries, and critiques that really encourage reflection, not just passive consumption.
Right.
Midway through this story, you're forced to weigh how your own personal compromises, even the small ones, can contribute to a culture where cruelty just starts to feel normal.
Where truth becomes negotiable.
Mm-mm.
And if we apply something like the golden rule here, well, it collapses completely. The whole system is built on suspicion and cruelty.
There's no room for it.
It forces you to ask if policies that normalize suspicion or dehumanizing language toward enemies, would you tolerate that if it were directed at you or your family?
And the answer is clearly no. Ethically, the novel shows a political order that violates every ideal we associate with good governance. The principles in the U.S. preamble, liberty, justice, general welfare.
All of it obliterated.
By a system that sees citizens only as expendable instruments.
And the thought police, plus this culture of denunciation, kids against parents. It makes any real solidarity impossible. Fear isn't a side effect.
No, it's the engine. It's what prevents people from ever applying the golden rule to each other.
We also see that stark class divide. The inner party, and then the impoverished masses, the proles.
And that structure is stabilized by propaganda, cheap gin, and endless distraction, not by any sense of shared belief.
But there's a flicker of something in there, isn't there? The book hints that where surveillance and ideology are weakest, in the daily, unscripted life of ordinary people.
There might be some untapped moral energy, something the regime just hasn't managed to control.
It's also important how emotion is portrayed in the book. It's not just feeling.
No, not at all. Emotion, fear, shame, desire, loyalty. It's shown as a powerful kind of reasoning. It can either sharpen your judgment or distort it.
Depending on how it's weaponized by the party.
Exactly. That's why those scenes of anxiety or forbidden affection are so powerful. They show us how political systems weaponize our emotions to erode courage and demand obedience.
They make you afraid of your own thoughts.
Philosophically, 1984 leans toward a very bleak, almost existential view.
Right.
It suggests that the lust for power can just outstrip any commitment to truth or solidarity unless those things are actively, constantly constrained.
That's a heavy thought. But then, if it's so bleak, why write it?
And that's the paradox. The very act of writing the book, this powerful cautionary tale, it implies a profound faith. It suggests that just by exposing these dangers, by making them clear, you can awaken a critical and moral resistance in the reader. The warning itself is an act of hope.
And from a structural standpoint, the book is, well, it's almost crushingly consistent.
It is.
Orwell aligns the setting, the plot, the symbols. Everything reinforces that same central claim about total control over truth and memory. The internal logic is suffocating.
And that consistency is one of its greatest strengths, but it does come with a trade-off.
What's that?
The book sacrifices some psychological nuance. Secondary characters can sometimes feel more like pure embodiments of ideas.
Like betrayal or fanaticism.
Exactly, rather than fully realized people with mixed motivations.
So it's logically tight, but the characters can feel more like warnings than like real messy people.
Precisely. But we can defend that trade-off as being appropriate for a didactic dystopia. A story designed to teach a crystal clear moral lesson above everything else. Its job isn't complexity, it's the clarity of its warning.
Agreed. And on the achievement side, 1984 gives us one of the clearest demonstrations of how surveillance, language manipulation, and historical revision all converge to dismantle not just freedom, but sanity itself.
And its core images. Big Brother, the telescreen, the thought police. They've become permanent parts of our global political vocabulary.
Right.
They distill these complex ethical critiques into memorable forms, which makes the warning indelible.
However, a balanced evaluation has to recognize its limitation. That near-total emphasis on defeat, it can risk normalizing despair. If the system is shown to be completely unbeatable, where does that leave the reader?
It creates a responsibility for the reader, for the critically engaged reader.
A responsibility to do what?
To appreciate the warning, but at the same time to question whether the novel's pessimism underestimates our own resilient capacity. The capacity of ordinary people and robust civic structures to push back. We need the critique, but we don't have to accept the conclusion of inevitability.
So without revealing any outcomes, the enduring lesson is clear. Truth, language, memory. They aren't just luxuries. They are shared moral responsibilities. They can never be safely delegated to any government or any party.
And to read 1984 critically is to then turn that lens onto our own world.
Yes.
We have to ask how far our own society tolerates manipulative language or unjust surveillance or the quiet erosion of empathy, and what our ethical duties are once we recognize those patterns.
That's the work that matters, the rational reflection.
Click the link on screen for the in-depth book analysis. It expands on this critique with reasoning tools and guide questions for readers and book clubs. Subscribe, share, purchase via the link if you choose, and continue thinking rationally about stories of power and conscience.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish.